Reg here, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels, and welcome to Onward. The new set has now been released, so as per your vote, Fling combo was the winning deck, so that is what we're going to be doing this week. So I've ended up changing up the implements deck essentially to fit Fling into it. I still think it needs a little bit of work, but it's still doing some stupid things, which is what we want it to do essentially. So if you guys didn't see the implements deck before, you should also check it out because it's really funny. But it's built around ravenous intruder, which I can sacrifice artifacts to get +2/+2, and we sacrifice implements, which are 1 converted mana cost artifacts. But with the foundry inspectors, they become free, so we can actually play implements for free. And when we sack them, we don't have to use the ability to do this either, so we can sack them using the intruder. When we sack them, we actually draw a card, so we could actually draw another implement off the top, play it for free, sack it, play it for free, sack it, play it for free. And we can also get it back from the graveyard to our hand if our opponent chooses to not take the 3 damage off a Pier's Revolution, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of synergies here, but we've also added in the Fling combo to this, which has actually made it a little bit more interesting, let's just say that. He's added a few more win conditions to the deck, so we can win in so many different ways. We've got Reckless Fireweavers to burn our opponent. We've got Ravenous Intruder, which we can use to deal combat damage to our opponent in 1 turn by making it unblockable with Key to the City. Or we can even fling it at our opponent, which is the combo we're going to go with today. So, let's have a look at Fling first, in fact. So this is the card that we are building around. Only 3 copies, because I don't want to see it too often. I'm a little worried that if I go for 4, I'll see it far too often, and the only thing we really want to be flinging most of the time is a Ravenous Intruder, or maybe at a push, a Smuggler's Copter, if we just need to close out the final little bit of damage. But for the most part, that's the only thing that we really need to fling. So we're trying to generate a combo together, but at the same time, some of the cards are a little bit dead without the other pieces, which is why I'm only going for 3 flings in this deck, because this is the dead half of the combo if we have it in hand and nothing else. So anyway, Fling is a 1 and a red instant speed card. It says at an additional cost to cast Fling, sacrifice a creature. Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. Player, more specifically, don't really ever want to be flinging it at our opponent's creatures unless there's something really stupid that might kill us. For example, maybe we fling a servo at our opponent's 1 toughness creature. That might be the only time that we ever use that. On a creature, but for the most part we want to be firing this at our opponent. So to do that, we want to be sacrificing artifacts to the Ravenous Intruder, getting him nice and big. He gets 2 power every single time we sacrifice an artifact. We have a lot of implements on the board, so we can get this guy up to maybe a 13, 14, that kind of thing, and then for 2 mana we get to fire a Fling at our opponent for 13 damage. That's the kind of the thing we're going for here. So let's go to the beginning of the deck, shall we? The first drop we've got is Bomat Courier, so this is 1 colourless for a 1/1 with haste. It's also an artifact and a creature, so we get to attack him with it on turn 1, but we also get to sacrifice it to the Ravenous Intruder as well. So when Bomat Courier attacks, you get to exile the top card of your library face down. We're not allowed to look at it. And we can pay 1 to discard our entire hand, sacrifice Bomat Courier, and put every single card exiled with Bomat Courier into our hand. So this is a great way to refill our hand if we run out of steam, because as you might guess, with a lot of these cheap artifacts and stuff like that, we're going to be emptying our hand quite quickly. So Bomat Courier is very useful for refilling our hand for that kind of thing. Did maybe consider the fact that we do actually empty our hand quite quickly, that we might want to go with... it's not creature types, it's over here. Might want to go with the Red God from Onward. This guy can't attack unless you have 1 off your cards in hand, but he's a 5/4 indestructible with haste. It's an interesting thought. I'm not sure if he fits though perfectly. He's kind of counterproductive to the combo, but we do get empty-handed quite a lot, so maybe he can actually deal a fair bit of damage. That's one of the considerations I've had for the decks anyway. If you do have any suggestions for improvements on the deck, if you play it yourself and you've found a way to improve it, then don't be afraid to tell me as well, because it is still a work in progress, this one. I might be changing it from episode to episode, we'll have to see. So if you do check out the deck tech, just be sure to look at the deck list in the description, because that will be updated every single time. Anyway, that being said, moving on, we've got Implement of Combustion. So for 1 colourless mana, we have an artifact. Says you can pay red, sacrifice it, and deal 1 damage to target player. It's fairly pathetic, but whenever it enters the graveyard from the battlefield, we get to draw a card. This is what all of the implements do, so just bear that in mind as we go through. So we can sacrifice it to 1 to deal 1 damage to a player. If we have maybe a Pier's Revolution on the battlefield, then our opponent can either take 4 from us sacking that, or they can give us it back and we'll do it again. Should bear in mind as well that Fireweaver will deal 1 damage when the implement enters the battlefield. So if they choose not to take the 3 and they put it back in our hand, we draw a card and we play the implement again, and a Fireweaver will deal an extra damage. There's also more synergies as well. If we have Insult, then damage can't be prevented, and if a Sorcerer control deals damage this turn, it deals double that instead. So if we sacked the Combustion with a Insult already in effect, it would deal 2 damage, and then a Pier's Revolution would deal 6 damage, and a Fireweaver would deal 2. So it really gets out of hand quite quickly, depending on the situation. There's just so many synergies, so many ways to win with this deck now that Armanket's out, and it's brought us some new tools. It's very good. But yes, we mostly want to be sacrificing implements for free off of the intruder and pumping it up again, which draws us into more implements so we can keep doing that. That's the gist of the deck anyway. We then have the Implement of Improvement. As I said, when it goes into the graveyard, we draw a card. Doesn't particularly matter that we can't always use the ability to sacrifice it, but we can actually in this deck, because we do have Ether Hubs and Crumbling Vestiges to generate that white mana. Not too much of it, but when it comes in handy, it's usually there for us to use. So this one generates 2 life if we sacrifice it, but for the most part, we'll be sacrificing it to an intruder to draw a card and pump up our intruder. Next, we have the Implement of Ferocity. When it enters the graveyard, we get to draw a card. This is the green version, and when we use the green mana instead to sacrifice it, we get to put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. So that could put our Ravenous Intruder out of certain burn spells range, that kind of thing. Maybe that's what we want to do. You never know. There are situations where that comes in handy. We then have 4 copies of Renegade Maps. So there's another 1 mana artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it's great sacrifice fodder to the Ravenous Intruder, and Pier's Revolution as well will also trigger when this goes into the graveyard. When it untaps, however, we can tap it and sacrifice it and search our library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. Renegade Map is really important in this deck because we are a combo deck that is running very cheap spells, so we don't really want to run too many lands. So as you can see, we're running 19 lands. We could even go a little bit lower than that. Because Renegade Maps are kind of counting as a tap land in this deck, but they're also artifacts that trigger the Reckless Fireweaver and can be sacrificed to the Intruder if that is the case. So this is kind of a land drop that the Ravenous Intruder can sacrifice in that sense, which is quite interesting. And also Pier's Revolution can pull it back and maybe we thin out our deck enough. But yeah, we really want to be thinning out our deck, because if we start sacrificing implements to the Ravenous Intruder, then the cards that we draw off, we really want to see more implements essentially. So getting the lands out of our deck is really important to us. Ravenous Intruder, we have talked about it briefly, but we'll go into more detail. So for 1 and a red, a 1/2 creature, it says sacrifice an artifact. Ravenous Intruder gets +2/+2 until the end of the turn. So every single implement we sacrifice, we get +2/+2 on the Ravenous Intruder. We draw a card. We can also sacrifice Smugglers, Copters, Key to the City, Servo Schematics, which generate 2 artifacts. So we can sacrifice both of them, and when we sacrifice the Servo Schematic, we get another Servo off of it as well. So that's actually 3 triggers for the Ravenous Intruder there as well. If I could run 4 copies of this, I absolutely would. But yeah, when we get our Ravenous Intruder to the size that we want, we either make it unblockable with Key to the City and swing in for lethal damage, or we fling it at our opponent to just go straight over their creatures and kill them instantly, hopefully. That is the plan anyway. We do have a lot of other things we can do with the Ravenous Intruder as well. If we go down to the end, we have Insult, so we can double the damage that gets dealt this turn. So if we are in combat damage, then we can get the Ravenous Intruder to deal double damage on its own, or we can fling it to get the Fling to deal double damage as well. We can also Onward, so once we've sacrificed all of our artifacts, and we've made Ravenous Intruder really big, we can use Onward to double its power essentially, and power is the thing that makes Fling do its job, so we can essentially sacrifice all of our artifacts, double its power, and then fling it off the edge, depending on how many lands that we've got in play, of course, because that is quite the expensive move to make, but in the long game that might just be an instant kill later down the line, which is pretty awesome. We then have 4 copies of Reckless Fireweaver, so we can't always fling our opponent for 20, so we kind of need to get them down to a low, reasonable life total in order to do that, and Reckless Fireweaver is one of the ways to do that. So for 1 and a red, we've got a 1/3 creature. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So suddenly every single implement is going to deal 1 damage when it enters, and it's going to deal damage when it leaves as well with the Pier's Revolution, unless our opponent gives us it back and then it re-enters the battlefield and Fireweaver deals damage that way. So our opponent can't really escape the damage from the Fireweaver or the implements for the most part. But the Reckless Fireweaver in the early game allows us to get our opponent down to maybe 13, 15, which is more than enough for the Ravenous Intruder to get flung over and kill our opponent, because we probably won't go anywhere near 20 for the most part. Obviously in the long game that will happen, but we want our opponent down to about 13, 10, that sort of range when we start flinging, which will make it so easy for us to win. So we've got 4 copies in order to do that. Plenty of artifacts to trigger them as well. As you can see, we're actually running more artifacts, or colourless cards in this case, than we are red sources. So Reckless Fireweaver's never without a trigger for the most part. We then have Smuggler's Copter, so for 2 mana, it is a 3/3 artifact vehicle with flying. When it enters the battlefield or blocks, you get to draw a card, and if you do, discard a card, and it has crew 1, which means everything in our deck can crew it. So we get to loot with Smuggler's Copter, which is really good because we are a combo deck, so we need to find all of our combo pieces. What we really want, the ideal situation, is a Ravenous Intruder and a Foundry Inspector on the field, and then either a Pier's Revolution or a Reckless Fireweaver, one of those things. If we can get all 3 of them together, then we can combo without the Fling, but we also could do with finding the Fling as well, so we get to loot lands away if we're getting flooded, that kind of thing. Or if we've got Fireweavers and no artifacts, we can maybe loot one of them away, that kind of thing. So we're sort of just going to find the best cards for the situation, and Smuggler's Copter is really good for that. Also dodges sorcery speed removal as well, because it goes back to being a vehicle at the end of turn, so it's really difficult for our opponent to deal with. And then if they do destroy one of our creatures, we've likely just got a servo or something to crew it up and swing in over the top again. And yet again, that gets our opponent down to the life total that we want them to be at for the Ravenous Intruder Fling combo, which is awesome. We then have Key to the City. We have briefly touched upon this, but there are more things to it. So for 2 mana, it is an artifact that says tap and discard a card. Up to 1 target creature cannot be blocked this turn. So this is one of the ways that we can get our Ravenous Intruder through our opponent and do lethal damage. It is a free action to do as well, just tapping and discarding a card. As long as we have a card in hand anyway, we can do this. So we may have a land in hand, that kind of thing. So we can make our lands into resources, essentially, as long as a Key to the City is around. However, when it becomes untapped, you may pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. So if we have more mana than we know what to do with, and we're drawing into lands, we can tap, discard the lands, and then on our untapped step, pay that 2 mana. We can draw an extra card each turn, searching for the combo pieces, that kind of thing. Only 1 copy of this because we are going over the top of our opponent and also burning them. I don't think Key to the City is going to be as relevant because we will have a Summoning Sick Ravenous Intruder, so we're hardly going to catch them off guard with a Key to the City combat damage thingamajig. But if, you know, there are times when it does happen. We then have Servo Schematic. As we mentioned, it is a 2 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 Servo artifact creature token. So when it enters, it creates itself and a Servo token. That's 2 triggers for a Fireweaver. That's 2 targets for a Ravenous Intruder. And we can sacrifice it to the Ravenous Intruder as well, and we'll get a Servo from that. So that's actually, for the Ravenous Intruder more specifically, that's 6 extra power we can generate off of a Servo Schematic. So there is a lot to be done there as well. We've talked about Fling. We're going to move to the Foundry Inspector because he's quite important to this deck. He does a lot of work when he gets to stick around. So for 3 colourless mana, we have got an artifact creature with 3/2 power and toughness. And it essentially says artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So everything that is colourless in this deck essentially becomes cheaper as long as there's a Foundry Inspector. With 1 of them on the board, all of our implements and our Beaumont Courier and our Renegade Maps, all of these cards are free. Officially, that is a lot of cards to be free in the deck, and if we sack them to the Ravenous Intruder, we get to draw a card, we very likely draw into another implement, we get to cast that for free, and we get to keep on going with that cycle until our Ravenous Intruder is massive, and then we fling it at our opponent. With an extra Foundry Inspector, then all of our Smugglers, Copters, Key to the Cities, and Servo Schematics become free as well, so therefore, with 2 of these on the field, every artifact is free except for the other Foundry Inspectors, which with 2 on the board, the next one costs 1, so we can just keep circling that value over and over again. But we really just need one on the field to truly go off with this deck. And you can imagine if we're casting these for free with a Fireweaver dealing 1 damage, and then we've got a Pierce Revolution, if they give us it back, then we get to cast it for free. We get to ping our opponent for 1, and it keeps on going. The only way they can stop it is actually dealing 3 damage to themselves, so all of our implements become 3 damage burn spells at that point, because it is in their best interest to put it in the graveyard, but some people... the AI, more specifically, doesn't understand how to play against this deck whatsoever. So if you are one of those people who likes to play against the AI, this is a perfect deck for you if you want to grind, because the AI has no idea how to work with this deck. It will always give you these implements back until it dies to the Fireweaver, which is hilarious, to say the least. Next we got Pierce Revolution. So we have touched upon this several times, but we will go into it in more detail. So for 2 and a red enchantment, whenever a non-token artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless your target opponent has Pierce Revolution, deal 3 damage to him or her. So every single artifact that dies other than our servo tokens now deals either 3 damage or it comes back to our hand so that we can cast it again. So we can do that for free with Foundry Inspectors if we're sacking implements and things like that. And our opponent either has to give us them back and we draw a card and get the implement back for free, essentially getting infinite card draw, or they take 3 damage from an implement which is a 1 mana 3 burn spell. Every single one of these essentially becomes a lightning bolt at this point, which is insane with a Pierce Revolution. And there comes a point as well where our opponent can't pay for this anymore or they die, so we get to just go infinite, which is awesome. Next we've got Onward, only 1 copy of this because the other side isn't too useful, although it is castable. So Onward says 2 and a red, instant speed, target creature gets +X/+O until the end of the turn where X is its power. So we get to double the power of any of our creatures. That means Smuggler's Copter becomes a 6/3, same for Foundry Inspector, that becomes a 6/2. But what we really want it for is the Ravenous Intruder. So as I mentioned, it's kind of difficult to get to 20 power on a Ravenous Intruder. However, with the Onward, we only actually need to get to 10 in order to instant kill our opponent. So that's not much at all in the late game as well. So we can Onward after we've sacked all of our implements and then fling our opponent for lethal. We also have Victory on the other side, so if we do want to go through combat damage as well, if our opponent is tapped out, quite likely to happen in some cases because our deck does look harmless until it kills you, for the most part. So for 2 and a white instead, it's got Aftermath, which means we have to cast it from our graveyard and then it gets exiled, which is fine with us because we're not planning on pulling it out of our graveyard at any point, so this is just an extra card for us to use. Target creature gets double strike until the end of the turn. So yet again, if we don't have a Fling and we want to go through combat damage, we can get our Ravenous Intruder up to 10 power, and then we can use the other half of Onward to give it double strike, and that's going to be lethal on its own as well, which is pretty sweet. To get that white mana, we can generate it through our Crumbling Vestiges and our Ether Hubs as well. So we have 5 white sources essentially to get Victory casted, but it's not going to happen as much, which is why it's only 1 copy. And also Insult is going to be essentially doing what Onward does, but a little bit better as well because the other side is more useful. I'm debating how many of these I need. I'm debating cutting Onward most of all because I think Insult does the job on its own, and I'm not sure we need 3 copies of this effect. So I might actually cut this down, but I'm not sure what to put in its place at the moment. Maybe it's the Armenket Red God, I'm not sure. Anyway, Insult. So for 2 and a red, 3 total mana, sorcery speed. Damage cannot be prevented this turn, so this beats Fogs, if that ever mattered. It probably will at some point in this deck's lifestyle, but because there are a few prevent damage spells, I think, in Armenket. I'm not going to go looking for them, but yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a fair few more. I don't think they'll see play, but you know, if you get your Turbo Fogs and stuff like that, this fight's way past it. So if our opponent thinks that they've got a Fog in hand and they're safe, they're not at all. Damage cannot be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double that damage instead. So everything deals double. Pierce Revolution now deals 6 damage if our opponent wants to put a implement in our graveyard. So if we're sacking them to the Ravenous Intruder, they either give them back to us, or this is a 1 mana 6 damage burn spell. Ravenous Intruder will deal double damage in combat, and Fling will deal double damage to our opponent, which means we only have to get our Ravenous Intruder to 10. There's that kind of thing. Absolutely everything deals double until the end of the turn with Insult, which is awesome. On the other side is Injury as well. Doubt we'll be casting both of these at the same time, but we shall still look at it as if it does anyway. Sorcery Speed and Aftermath, which means we cast it from our graveyard. Injury deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. So this is a good way to get that blocker out of the way so we can go for combat damage with our Ravenous Intruder. And it also deals 2 damage to a player. If we've cast both of these on the same turn, then Injury deals 4 damage to a creature and 4 damage to a player, which means it gets past most of our opponent's stuff. So if we did Insult and Injury, taking out our opponent's last blocker, for example, sacked all of our artifacts, we only need a 10 power Ravenous Intruder to get through and kill our opponent, short of them having life gain anyway. So there's so much synergy in this deck. It's been a lot of fun to play. And I hope you guys enjoy watching it because it goes off pretty well. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, that's essentially the deck. Let's go on to the mana base because that is actually kind of interesting. We've got 11 mountains. We are running Renegade Maps, as I mentioned earlier, which does grab the basic out of our library. So we do get to thin the 19 lands out of our deck, which is actually something we want to do, believe it or not, because we do top out at 3. And likely a lot of things are going to be cheap and not really going to cost us anything. So we only need like 3 mana to do the Insult and then sacrifice it all to get over onto our opponent. 4 mana total to do a Ravenous Intruder and Fling on the same turn. So maximum we want 6 lands. You know, ideally we want 4 to do Fling and Ravenous Intruder on the same turn. That's kind of the ideal situation. Anyway. We have Ventus Fare as well. It is a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. It adds 1 colourless to your mana pool. Should mention as well, that is quite likely to happen because we do let our implements just sit on the battlefield for several turns before we kill our opponent, so we'll be gaining a fair bit of life from that. It does buy us a lot of time to build our combo up. But there's also the added bonus of being able to pay for and sacrifice it. Sacrifice the Ventus Fare, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it and put it into your hand and shuffle your library. Activate this only if you have 3 or more artifacts. So if we've got loads of implements on the field, we'll be able to activate this. 5 mana total means that we can actually go search out a Foundry Inspector on our opponent's end step, which might be all we need in order to make all of our implements free. If we've got a Pier's Revolution and an Intruder on the field, that's all we need to complete the combo. So we get to search out this. That's likely to be the only thing we want to get, although Servo Schematic as well is 3 targets for the Ravenous Intruder, and the Reckless Fireweaver is 2 triggers as well, so maybe that's something we want to find if our opponent's on a really low life total. Not entirely sure, but that might be the case. We then have a Rogue's Passage. This is essentially a land version of Key to the City. Can't be removed in the same way that Key to the City can be anyway. Adds 1 colourless to our mana pool. Not very destructive in the slightest, all of this colourless mana, should I mention as well, because we don't have that many red sources of cards in here. No doubles or anything like that. All a single red is all you need, and the rest can be colourless for all we care. But you pay 4 and you make a target creature unblockable this turn as well, so we get that Ravenous Intruder combat damage win as well through the Rogue's Passage. Ether Hub, quite important to the deck actually. So when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 energy. You get to generate colourless off of it, or you get to spend that energy to make 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. So this is mostly here for sacking the implements that are off colour, if we should need to do that. But also we can get the victory, the white mana off of the Ether Hubs there as well. But for the most part, we'll be spending either red mana or colourless mana with the Ether Hub. That's likely to be the case. Next we have Crumbling Vestige. Kind of the same thing, except for the coloured mana comes only on the turn that you play it. So it enters the battlefield tapped. However, when it enters the battlefield, we add 1 mana of any colour to our mana pool, which means we can generate white mana. It comes into play essentially as an untapped land, although it is tapped. And in future turns, it's colourless mana, which doesn't actually hurt us in the slightest either. So that's essentially the deck, guys. If you did enjoy the look of it, then be sure to check out the matches, and don't forget to like and subscribe for some more Magic Duels content in the future. We're going to be doing a match every single day until we change decks, and then there's a combo deck coming out later this week as well. I'm going to try and get out videos every single day for you guys, because Armanket seems like it's going to be really interesting, and I hope you do enjoy the look of this deck. If you do have any suggestions for changes, leave them in the comments section below. And also don't forget to hit that little bell icon right next to the subscription button. It'll notify you when I release new videos. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.